we are very significant admirers of this organization and have used their work to create the Canadian version of the CTTI model, as well as it guided the work we did in Colorectal Cancer Canada did in the work related to a stakeholder charter. At its most fundamental level, the CTTI initiative is a group of individuals and organizations that want to improve the quality and efficiency of clinical trials. And Dr. Starling will certainly share more about its vision and mission with you. However, her focus today is going to be on something called the Transforming Trials 2030 Vision Framework, which has been developed. This work has the potential to offer pathways that can be utilized also in the Canadian context. And following Summer's presentation, as I've been suggesting, and you see on the agenda, we'll be moving into a workshop that is actually going to explore this 2030 transformation model. What's interesting about the model, as you'll see, is quite specific and quite defined in terms of presenting a framework and some specific, what Summer will call domains that we'll talk about in the Canadian context. So as Summer is talking, very important that you understand some of the componentry of this framework, because we'll be using it for the workshop. And there'll be a period also at the end of Summer's presentation where you can feel again free to come up to the microphone and answer questions that I will hope inform some of the work we do this afternoon. Dr. Starling.
Wow, this is a tough act to follow. I felt like I needed tissues after the video. I need to catch my breath. I want to say that we talk so much at Citi and in a lot of conferences that I go to about centering the patient. And I'm just really impressed with this conference and everybody here. I really feel that coming through. So thank you so much for your attention today. I want to just offer a brief disclaimer as I get started that I do work for Duke University and that my group is funded by the FDA. So I'm here today representing the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, or CTTI. And we have a mission at CTTI to drive innovations and promote the adoption of practices to improve both the quality and the efficiency of clinical trials. We do this in three key ways. The first is by providing thought leadership, not just providing it, but really fostering thought leadership across the clinical trials enterprise. We have a comprehensive set of recommendations and tools that we develop with our extensive stakeholder groups. And we also drive where we have strategic communications and engagement opportunities for dialogue and to deepen our work and deepen our thought leadership. So CTTI is a member-driven organization. We have a little over 70 members, and they are representing a wide array of stakeholders across the clinical trials enterprise, from sponsors to sites, CROs, patients, foundations, advocacy groups, and regulatory groups. So Anne-Marie did a great job of introducing our Transforming Trials by 2030 vision, and I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about this. And I think what I'd like to do is sort of start at the top and kind of drill down a little bit, if you will, with me today. This is the very top. CTTI has a bold vision for how we want clinical trials to be done in 2030. And the vision falls into 5 broad areas, which we think of as pillars. There's a QR code here if you want to be a passive participant and check out everything that we have to say about this vision. Please feel free to do so. But our 5 pillars of the vision really start with pillar 1, with patient centricity. So our first pillar is that clinical trials center the patient and are easily accessible. Our second pillar says that we want clinical trials to be integrated into healthcare processes. We don't want work streams between routine healthcare to be totally separate from the process of participating in a clinical trial. Our third pillar, even though it's situated in the middle, is actually probably the most integral to City's work, which is we want clinical trials to be designed with a quality approach. So I'll get into a minute a little bit about what this means, but essentially we want all clinical trials to be designed with an eye for fitness for purpose. So somebody brought this comment up earlier today about we don't necessarily need endless trials where overall survival is the primary outcome. We need trials fit for discrete purposes. We need them to be designed with stakeholder input throughout the cycle of the trial. Our fourth pillar is about maximally leveraging all available data in the clinical trials enterprise. So the enterprise itself is an evidence generation system. And what our pillar stipulates is that we want to be able to use all available data behind the person, behind the Cindy's of the world to try to access and get them into the right trials, whether it comes from clinical sources or non-clinical sources. And then our fifth pillar is about population health. We want clinical trials as an evidence generation system to level into recommendations and guidances for care. So I said we're going to go a little bit deeper now. So that is our vision. And I know we're going to do a bit more workshopping around it today. I want to go now a little bit into the work that we are doing to scaffold and build out the vision, particularly as it pertains to how we would assess our progress along this vision. So it's 2024. I'm not a math major, but I do know that 2030 is not that long from now. And so, we started a project called the Measuring Trials Transformation Project, wanting to ask ourselves, what would we need to measure in order to know if we were making progress on our vision for 2030? So the Measuring Trials Transformation Project and Framework is what I'll talk about for a few minutes next. Our objectives with this project were really to create a discrete set of metrics that we think, if they were measured with data sources that we could be confident in, that they would show how we were doing. We could then create a baseline to then measure against in the coming years to understand how we are doing on these transformation elements. So there's a QR code here if you want to see a little bit more detail about the MTT project in full, which includes our big project team, which is very interdisciplinary and very cool. I encourage you to snap that and take a look. Oh, this might be a little tough to read. It's orange on my screen, but I hope it's not too bad for you guys to see. So this is the Measuring Trials Transformation Framework. And our framework includes, again, starting at the top with our 5 pillars. Underneath each of those pillars, we have what's called domains. And the domains that are listed here underneath each pillar, thank you so much. The nicest, thank you so much. The domains that are listed here in the boxes are essentially, they're concepts, but they're what we are saying is these are the essential ingredients to be able to achieve this pillar. We will not be able to achieve the pillar without without a focus on these specific things. So I won't go through the entire framework because this is just the domain level. So this is like the pillars are level 1, the domains are level 2. We have 5 pillars and 19 domains in the framework. And you see here that there are 5 domains in the patient centricity pillar, And honestly, I feel like I've heard these light bulb aha moments all day today about each of these domains, and it's been so exciting. So our domains under the patient centricity pillar are population awareness of trials. So how are people becoming educated and aware of trials in the wild, right? Not necessarily at a clinical site, but in the wild. How accessible are trials? What are the enrollment burdens that people face to get into trials? We also want to look at patient input into trials. So this is slightly separate from stakeholder input in the design process, but we do want to track how often are patients being asked for their input in trials and what does that look like. We want to understand how representative clinical trials are to assess patient centricity. So this is how many clinical trials are being offered to address conditions for which affect specific populations, and how diverse are clinical trials. And then lastly, our final domain in the patient centricity pillar is about participant experience. So it's related to patient input, but it's really about how are we creating a feedback loop for what it is like to participate in trials that we can then use to improve. So these are our domains. This is level 2. I want to take you one more level down, which is into the level of our embedded metrics. I hope this is readable. It might be, but in either way, we'll share our slides afterwards. I'll share these afterwards. So the final piece of the framework are metrics. And so inside each of the domains, each domain is matched with 3 metrics. The metrics they move in complexity. They begin with a sort of a near-term focus, and they move into a medium-term focus, and then the 3rd metric inside each domain is truly aspirational. So that is something that we would be able to measure in a really aspirational way. So this comprises the full framework. 5 pillars, 19 domains, and 57 associated metrics across the framework. The domains of interest and each of the metrics were developed with an iterative process, beginning with first city leadership and our executive team. Then we took the domains and also our draft metrics to a survey of 65 experts in the United States, specifically experts in these domain areas and in these pillar areas. And we asked our experts, does this metric represent the essence of the domain? Is this metric the right one to measure? And then lastly, we opened this entire framework up for public comment in late last year. And we got a little over 100 public comments. We were asking for input from anyone involved in the clinical trials space to say, do these metrics make sense to you? Do you have input on how they could be clearer? Do you have any ideas on what data we might want to be pursuing in service to these metrics? And so we made some changes to the framework late last year following that. So I'd like to now give just a few examples. So there are 57 metrics in the framework, but I'm going to give just a few examples from each of the pillars that I think help to tell what we're trying to achieve in terms of understanding impacts for patients. So this is just a selection, but I think I'm really looking forward to hearing thoughts on these and just helping this guide the conversation. So I have 2 examples from Pillar 1 to share. The first is around accessibility, which in my thinking is really in some ways kind of the heart of this pillar. But one of our metrics for this is the % of trials that assess and attempt to mitigate common enrollment burdens prior to trial initiation beyond what is routine in the industry today. So the idea behind this metric is attempting to understand how many trials out there are attempting to make it easier for people to get into trials beyond maybe just the status quo. Another example from Pillar 1 is around participant experience. So this is the percent of trials, and again, this is all trials. We are aiming pretty big to say we want to understand the percent of all trials that have actual participants provide feedback on their trial experiences through an instrument like the SPFQ for this purpose during or after the trial. So if we go into Pillar 2, which is all about integration into healthcare processes, here's an example from Pillar 2, which is all about the consent process in care settings. So we are interested in understanding what percent of trials have consent into clinical research or trials automated or embedded in clinical workflows. This is a tricky one to understand what data sources we might need to have to answer it. But we're really interested in trying to measure, how many trials are trying to enable consent as part of routine care. From Pillar 3, which is our design with quality approach, here is an example from stakeholder engagement. The percent of trial protocols that identify key stakeholders for input on design. Note that this is not incorporate input in the design, but we are interested in seeing as a near-term metric how many protocols out of all the trials that are happening have mention of stakeholders. And I'll just link here in the QR code to our engaging stakeholders in trial design work at Citi. Again, we have a full suite of recommendations and tools on a lot of these topics, so I thought this could be interesting to folks. A concept from Pillar 4, which is all about maximally leveraging data. This one I'll talk a little bit more now and then in a few moments, but we have one related to privacy and security. And for this one, we really are interested in sponsors' intentions to share individual participant data, either for future trials or with potentially other research opportunities. So our metric for this is the percent of trials with consent forms that discuss potential use of data for future research directly with participants. And this is again a sponsor intention metric. And so for this, we have put as a, for instance, a plan to share an IPD in their clinicaltrials.gov reporting. So this is all about sort of the clinical trials environment is in making attempts to have responsible reuse of data, that we don't keep generating data as part of clinical trials with no plan to reuse that data. And sorry if this is hard to see too, but I'll just offer 2 examples from our Pillar 5, which is about population health. So efficiency, we intend to track, or we'd like to begin tracking the average length in months of phases 1 through 3 clinical trials for each new intervention a year. This, we think, matters a lot for especially patients with in rare disease spaces. And also actionable learning, which is a domain in this pillar. The percent of clinical trials that are cited for updated guidance for clinical care. So this is about trying to extend the evidence generation happening in trials to guidances and making the population healthier. So I want to briefly mention just some of our current project efforts. Our goal is not to try to answer all 57 of these metrics, but we are trying to pursue some of them. And we're trying to create basically some goalposts to say, Citi is attempting to see how we could start to measure this, and we want to put some goalposts around some of these so we can see how we're doing. So I'll go back to the privacy and security metric, and I'll just mention that this is the one that we are currently working on, or one of them, which is around sponsor intention to share participant data. So we're working right now with 2 forms of data, both from clinicaltrials.gov, which we fully recognize is not a perfect data source. Clinicaltrials.gov has a lot of limitations, but we are starting with that because the Citi maintains the aggregated analysis of clinicaltrials.gov data, or ACT, and so we have good access into this data in a raw form and in summary form. So this is where we're starting. We're looking at, in summary, All trials that started in 2018 to current, we have some exclusionary criteria, but we're ending up with a summary analysis of about 47,000 trials. So we have some top-line data on these trials. We have funder type and some other types of data that we're looking into. We also have access to original study documentation as part of this effort. So we have a little over 2,000 original study documents from phase 3 interventional studies with results. We intend to look at these separately because, again, we'd like to actually try to open up and see how sponsors are describing in some of their protocols some of the efforts to do some of these things. So for the original study documentation piece, we're looking to employ large language models or other ways of reviewing large bodies of work to understand what's inside them. So just as a very preliminary report out on this, we found from our summary data from clinicaltrials.gov that about a quarter of all studies in our catchment reported yes, that they do intend to share individual participant data in their consent forms. This is self-reported on clinicaltrials.gov from sponsor submissions. But to our knowledge, this is really the first time that someone's really looked at it and said, like, yes, this is what people are doing. So we're going to go with a quarter, about a quarter, and it varies by funder type, which will, we will plan on some more analysis around that. But we want to publicize this and get some reactions about this and continue this conversation around, do we need to make that number higher? How would we do that, and why does it matter? Okay, thank you so much. I encourage you to please connect with us. Please connect with Citi. And again, I just want to iterate how humbled and happy we are to be here. Thank you so much for your attention.
Summer is very happy to take questions, especially as you prepare for the workshop, so come on up.
Hi, Summer. That's excellent. I'm very, very impressed. I'm always impressed with the work that Citi does. So heard from them last year too. I have two little questions. If I'm understanding correctly what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm not, everything that you're doing with this initiative and transformation has to do with patient partnership in clinical trials, patient participation in trials as opposed to patient partnership. So I'm wondering if there's metrics associated with satisfaction, evaluation, how well the actual engagement process is going from a partnership or a co-lead or co-partnering perspective, because I'm not quite clear, and I think it's as important as participation, and it sometimes, I think, falls by the wayside. Thanks.
And your first name is? Linda. Linda, thanks for the question. So in thinking about our framework as a whole, and again, that's our 5 pillars and the 19 domains that are associated underneath those pillars, some of them do speak, they really are about patients and patient experience in trials. So around patient access and quality by design, or participant experiences, right? So they center the patient as a part of the trials process. But then there are other domains and there are other metrics that it's also about collecting participant or patient input into key inflection points during the design of trials. And that is agnostic to whether or not there is participation for the individual, if that makes sense. We're interested in collaborating. Citi collaborates with patient advocacy organizations as we develop our recommendations. But the framework itself has both. I guess it has, we want to track and understand patient experiences in trials, but we also want to track them as a stakeholder group at all of these different inflection points. Whether or not they end up participating in a trial. Thanks for the question, great question.
So thanks for the presentation, Summer, that was great. And you did have a QR code, which kind of answers part of Linda's question as well. and that is the section on patient group engagement and patient engagement in the ideation of the clinical trials all the way through the continuum, which was the inspiration for starting at our first annual clinical trials conference. And that can be seen how we Canadianized that model on our pactcanada.org site, PACT, canada.org site. And you can see how we incorporated your model, your original city model, in that. So the fundamental beginning, I think, of this program was really the patient and patient group engagement. And this is almost like the second phase of it, from what I can see, in terms of looking for those key performance indicators with respect to trials. I think these are definitely some of the metrics, if not many of the metrics, that can be used to help measure the progression or improvement of trials in Canada. We may have to tweak a few of those. We'll talk about that during the workshop this afternoon, or this afternoon. I was going to say this morning, it's going so fast. But really appreciate that. But I think it's important for everybody to realize that this is a progression of work and collaboration between industry and the FDA in the United States, as well with Duke, and that these really represent a lot of the patient-centered approach to the clinical trials that we've been talking about all the way through. So my question to you is not so much at this particular moment, but it will be this afternoon in the workshop. How do you see these principles applying to the Canadian system, which I know you're not totally familiar with, but a little bit familiar with by now, perhaps, and you will be more tomorrow after Health Canada presents, on our system. But I think you heard a little bit from some of our physicians today and the industry to gain a little perspective how this might integrate into the Canadian system. Are these international components? Are these specific to the U.S.? And how might they be applied in Canada?
Is this when I jump off the stage and throw the mic to somebody else because I'm not Canadian?
No, but you have relatives here, we know about that.
I love this question, and you prepped me for this question, Barry, and I will be honest, I am on a learning curve. Today has been amazing so far, and just considering the Canadian context for this, I'd like to offer two ideas, two considerations. I think that the metrics specifically and the work related to embedding trials into clinical workflows, I think is, in my very rough and untested sense, and I'd be open to disagreement, but I think that there might be a lot of overlap there between, or just opportunities to understand that context, because what we're finding is that to track that in the United States, we have to go to the site level. We have to understand what are the sort of change management components or the system components at sites that are allowing them to integrate trials consent, even getting people aware of clinical trials at the doctor's office. We have to go to some of those sites to understand what some of the challenges are. And we know that some of the challenges are related to site staffing burnout. We know some of those challenges are related to clinical sites being understaffed. We see that a lot more too in remote areas or where we have sites that are dealing with site closures, and then we have people who are taking on those workloads, and then the integration piece suffers. So I think there's a lot of overlap there. I think that would be a fascinating thing to dig into in the Canadian context, to sort of say, what is the reality of our potential there, to integrate into sites or into clinical workflows in Canada. And then I think the other piece that I think is global is the leveraging data. I think that what we want to be able to track is around how integrated can we be? How can we take data that we are collecting from people, from real people, and make it accessible for the next opportunity for a clinical trial? And we think that those opportunities are essentially borderless. I mean, I think, we could think about ways that to really make it a lot more seamless and to really open up and open source that type of data for patients so that we don't have to recollect it. And so I guess I'll just offer those as something I see as a fruitful kind of thing to think about. But I'm going to learn a lot in the workshops as well, so thank you.
Summer, I Barry raised it, and I thought it would be very helpful to the audience. You've done an amazing job at pulling together multi-stakeholders in a very collaborative, open forum environment. It's been a theme a couple of times this morning, the need to work together, to be more collaborative, we're a small nation, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about how many organizations, who those are, how you corralled them, and with what benefit?
Absolutely. I would love to. So, we're a member-driven organization, and this is a symbiotic relationship with our members. So, members pay to be a part of City, and we use them as basically eyes and ears into the entire enterprise. Everything we do at City is entirely grounded in this interdisciplinary approach. City does have, I don't have a slide about it, but City has a scientific method for gathering evidence on a specific topic. It's usually a mixed methods approach, heavily in qualitative research as well. But we really leverage our really vast community of members and experts to gather evidence on a particular topic, refine it. We, of course, work closely with the FDA. And then our recommendations and tools and our other products are really, they're products out of that. They are truly, they're designed in a really multidisciplinary way. Our membership base changes all the time. We are kind of always balancing, trying to get a little bit more of this perspective, a little bit less, not less, but a little bit more of certain perspectives than others. But we really value our members, and I think this is a very unique model for advancing trials. If there's more specific questions about City membership, I'm happy to answer those too.
Okay, I think everybody wants to get to work.
Thank you all.